This morning I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, visiting with Karen Selden, who is vacationing near here. You and your husband, in fact, happen to
Right.
be on holiday, and by chance, my son and I, who are on this road trip trying to do a few of these oral history sessions, we sort of connected here in Arizona, which is sort of an odd thing because you are
Yeah.
ordinarily based, as David was,
Yeah.
is in Boulder, Colorado, where you're the metadata services librarian at the University of Colorado's William A. Wise Law Library. I like to get the full title in case somehow the donor finds out we didn't do it or something.
There you go. That's
Yes.
great.
Well, I also want to congratulate you right at the very top. You are going to be on the AELL Executive Board for about 3 years, starting momentarily.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your election. That will be a wonderful experience. You get to know several colleagues. Well, you'll be basically with 3 groups because you'll be on 3 years and then they change.
Right.
But you'll get to know them in ways you would never bond and hopefully not because of any trauma affecting the association.
That's right, exactly.
But you never know.
Yeah.
It could happen.
And well,
But
thank
it's
you.
a nice experience.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, coming from a former AELL president, that means a lot. That
Yeah,
the
somehow
voice of
I must have
experience.
been low on candidates that
No.
year. No, actually, I was one of the early, one of the very first contested presidential elections. Yeah.
Well, congratulations to you too.
And I ran against good people. I lost on one, and the next time I won on a different person. So,
Great.
so they were real races. They were not, setups or anything. I felt good about that. Well, I also want to thank you specifically, Karen, for interrupting your vacation to let me drop by here at this place where you're staying here for a couple of nights before you go on to probably a nicer place, or a different place.
Right. They're all pretty. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is in Flagstaff, where you had a little dusting of snow yesterday, I understand.
Right.
But there's no sign of it now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Spring in the west.
Yeah. Well, it's customary, Karen, to begin our conversations by learning a bit about the person with whom I'm talking as a person, as opposed to just one of our colleagues. Not that there's any difference, although with these computer and artificial intelligence, that may change.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So can I ask you a little bit about your life, perhaps not just now, but even when you were younger?
Sure. Well, from my younger years, my family, as I was growing up, was my parents and my brother, who's almost 2 years younger than me, and myself. My father was a forest ranger with the U.S. Forest Service for almost all of his career. And so as you can imagine, we lived near beautiful places, near the National Forest. We stayed on the East Coast and in New England the whole time as I was growing up.
They were nice back there. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've been on a couple the last few days on this road trip in the desert Southwest. And they're beautiful in their own way, but very different from the treed places like up where I live, where I'm not near.
Oh, right, exactly. So you understand how that is.
Yeah.
So we lived in kind of rural places generally, and as you can imagine, having a forest ranger for a father, we did a lot of outdoor activities like camping and canoeing and fishing and hiking and swimming. So my brother and I were both born in Southern Virginia.
Uh-huh.
And while my father was at the Thomas Jefferson National Forest. And shortly after my brother was born, after I turned 2, we moved for a little over 2 years to West Virginia for my dad to work on the Monongahela National Forest. Right before,
Not terribly far from the first one.
yeah, that's true. And there's kind of a progression here because then right before I turned 5, we moved to Western Pennsylvania to the Allegheny National Forest.
Slowly moving sort of north.
We are, and of course this was a homecoming for my parents because my parents had grown up in Western Pennsylvania.
Oh.
So that was kind of the progression, My dad's career actually had started in Kentucky, so he did make his way back up to Pennsylvania. that was really nice because obviously we were relatively near, an hour or so away from all of my, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins.
Oh, that must have been nice.
Yeah, so that was kind of a nice time between 4 and 14 to be close by to that extended family.
Uh-huh.
So that was really that worked out really well, and I'm sure my parents were very, very happy with all of that. And then eventually, let's see, between my freshman and sophomore year in high school, we moved to central New Hampshire for my dad to work on the White Mountain National Forest. And that's where he eventually ended his career and retired.
Oh, okay.
So my parents decided that that's where they would stay.
So they stayed up in New England when he retired.
Yeah, they did. So my dad has been there now for 41 years.
Wow.
In the same house that we moved to.
Even as a New Englander, he's a recent addition.
Yes,
I remember I lived for 2 years in New England in my early years.
Okay, yeah.
And if you hadn't lived there all your life, you were sort of a newcomer.
Yeah, there you go. That's kind of
Although
neat.
41 years, maybe they've accorded him the recognition that he really is an old timer.
Well, it's kind of nice because he's been there so long. I made a lot of friends in high school, and of course how it is. You become friends with the parents of your children's friends. So
Yeah.
he's found a really good community there. I must say, of course, my mother was there too. She passed away almost 2 years ago, but
Oh,
they,
yeah. Sorry.
oh, well, thank you. They made a nice life there and found a good community. My dad is now 84 years old, still living in the house that we moved to in 1977. I feel really good, though, that he has this nice community around him.
That'll be important, especially as he does age a bit more, just to have people who look out to see that he's around.
Yes, that's
Yeah, 'cause
exactly
that's
right.
the scary thing, being
Yeah.
now a widower, you presumably might be
Right.
living alone, and
Yeah.
as you get old, something happens, you don't want people to forget you or should be looked after.
Right. So he has a really vibrant community of friends and
That's
all.
important.
And, yeah, and he plays bridge and senior exercise. So we're glad. We're very grateful, and we're really proud of him for really stepping up to the challenge.
And he's in his own house still? Or?
He is. Yeah. We just recently I went back and helped him find one of these services who comes in, as often as you'd like. But this lady comes in every other week to help a bit with some of the housekeeping and any other things he needs. So, we feel lucky about that.
Yeah. That's good for him, and it's good for everybody around him, I suspect, because he makes him feel he's still viable, and he is.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
he's living his life as he should be at this point in life.
He is. We're really happy. In fact, one of his friends pulled me aside when I went to visit and asked her, "Are you going to be, taking him away?" And I said, "No. He wants to stay, and we want him to stay." So
That's what's important.
yeah. So that's kind of a neat 41-year, relationship I've had with New Hampshire. I actually moved there when I was 14. Stayed there for the most part till I was in my mid-30s when we moved to Colorado. The exception being when I went back to college, I went back to Pennsylvania. But you talked with David earlier.
Nothing wrong with the schools in Pennsylvania.
That's right, yeah.
That's all I'm told.
That's right. So
Unless you play football against them, and then there is at least during the game.
that's right. There you go. So I feel I'm very grounded in New Hampshire. I spent 21 years there, and in 1998 we moved to Colorado. We being my husband and I moved to Colorado. While I was living in New Hampshire, after college, I moved to the Concord, New Hampshire area. Got a job, lived there on my own, and met David, my husband, who eventually got married. So
Maybe I should tell our viewers who might not yet have realized that David's had a session too on camera.
that's right.
So this is your chance to rebut this, because we're doing them one after the other, and you heard what he said.
I
So
did.
If there's anything you want to correct, this is your opportunity.
There we go. That's right. See, there's something to be said about being the one who goes second. Everyone wants to go first. But
Plan very carefully.
There
I'm
you
sure,
go.
on your part, Karen.
yeah. So we moved from New Hampshire for David's job. He is the director of the National Indian Law Library. We moved there in 1998, early 98, so a little over 20 years now, and we've been there a long time. We both work in Boulder, but we live in a small town to the north of Boulder. In fact, it's exactly between Boulder and Rocky Mountain National Park. 18 miles in either direction.
Some of the old, it may not be a national forest, but you'll probably go to the parks too.
We do a lot, and there's our little town of about 2,000 people is surrounded by county open space park system with lots of nice trails, lots of good, outdoor opportunities. There's a theme here in my life, I guess, being outdoors. Yeah. But the tiny town we're in really fits us well because I've lived in rural places all of my life. And
you're not exactly that far from the fairly substantial cities, including Boulder is not tiny.
Right.
And Denver is even bigger.
Right. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Yeah. I actually work. I work 2 or 3 Saturday afternoons a month in the Tiny Lions Library doing their cataloging, which is very different and very fun from law cataloging, kids stuff and all. But it's easy in a tiny town to get involved. David mentioned in his interview being involved in sustainability in the town. I'm involved with the library. And it's just nice that we found a really good community there, even though we don't have children and we don't have family immediately there. So kind of the whole
I haven't
theme.
run into any dogs here, so maybe you don't have a
Oh,
dog.
that's right.
Or you didn't bring him.
That's right. That's true. We don't have kids or pets. I once had a friend who said we don't have kids, pets, but we do have bills. That's the only thing we have.
That seems to be an occupational hazard for everybody, no matter what their occupation.
That's right. So my theme is sort of that I've been very blessed and fortunate to have 3 geographic places in my life where I really feel at home and really have roots, back in western Pennsylvania. Literally, I still have family there. I have family in New Hampshire, of course, in this 41-year, really nice relationship with the people there, lifelong friendships and all. And then, of course, now we've bloomed where we're planted in Colorado. So.
Now, I usually follow up my original question about hobbies and interests, and you've been telling me about a lot of them. But is there anything outside of that array that you also pursue as sort of a hobby or a special interest?
Well, that's true. Well, a lot of outdoor things, cross-country skiing, hiking. Actually, we're most known, David and I are most known as being runners, especially David.
He had mentioned that,
That's right.
Marathons and stuff, among other things.
Yeah,
So you do that too?
I do too, not nearly as well as David, but we run on roads, run on trails, any distances, 5K to 50K. We've done big ones, and we have, as David mentioned, really fond memories of the Hein Fun Runs that used to be held at the annual meetings. So
unfortunately, times change, and that was one of the changes.
But it's good to have those memories, and this is definitely historical, going back in time. I've done 5 marathons myself.
Wow.
2 Boston marathons, including the 100th, so that was fun. And I've done 1 ultra marathon. We've lost track of David's marathons at probably 60 or so. He's probably done close to 100. I did a 50K trail ultra marathon, so that was kind of fun. The other things I do that aren't outdoors, I exercise the right side, the artistic side of my brain, by making handmade greeting cards.
Oh.
So I learned that about 15 years ago from a friend, and I get together once a month. I go to what's called a stamp camp, where they have different stations that you go to make cards, 10 to 12 of them, and I learn new techniques. I learn about new designs and new colors, color combinations. And what I really like, you have those cards you bring home, but then I love to personalize cards, and kind of like little love letters to people. You know the sort of things they like or their favorite colors.
I would think that would make them a lot more attractive, the cards to the recipients. I mean, the ones you get from the major companies are very good, but they're not personalized in that sense.
Right. I've had many people say they want to keep and frame the cards, which is fun. So that's been a fun thing. And of course I'm a reader, being a librarian. I was in 2 book groups back in New Hampshire, and I'm in a book group now in my little town in Lyons, where I found probably my best friends there. And we read fiction, nonfiction. I've been exposed to things I would not have read before, which is a neat thing. And it also gives me incentive every month to crack open at least 1 new book each month. So I do a little of everything, outdoor and indoor. Yeah.
That sounds like you're sort of well-grounded in a variety of choices. Depending on the weather, you can be inside or outside, or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, sort of turning now to your career, Karen. I know you have two degrees. Can you tell us what they are and where you got each?
Sure. I have a bachelor's degree in elementary and early childhood education from Penn State. That was where I went back to school. My dad has his forestry degree from Penn State, and so does my brother.
Mm-hmm.
So we have quite a Penn State family. Lots of Pennsylvania ties for sure. And I eventually got my Master's of Library Science from Simmons in Boston.
Same one your husband went to, from what he was telling me. Now, did you commute from New Hampshire for that, or did you live down in Boston area?
No, David commuted, and so did I.
So you were, all right, that's right, he did allude to that you followed him to Simmons after he finished up.
Right, so it's pretty easy. They have direct buses. It's, between New Hampshire and Boston, because a lot of people do live in New Hampshire and commute.
As I commented in David's interview, out here in the West, being in another state seems like a terribly long distance, and it can be.
Yes.
But back there, they're not so terribly long between places.
Right, especially in New England.
Yeah. Now, before you got the library degree and started working as a librarian, did you actually teach or anything with that education degree?
Yes, I actually did. Although I do have to admit, over the years I've found that education degree has been useful throughout my career, because obviously you learn about people's learning styles, how to take a task and make it into smaller steps to make it easier for people to learn. You learn, learning styles could be some people prefer to read something, some people prefer to hear.
Yeah.
Some prefer to have more tactile or a combination. So I've used that as a supervisor and a trainer a lot, but so informally. But formally, I spent 3 years teaching Head Start, which is a federally funded program for low-income families. So that means generally it's single mothers usually. And I really liked working with the 4-year-olds. That was fun because they're at a neat age where everything is new.
They're not terribly naughty quite yet.
Yeah,
that comes in the teens.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, everything's
in
new
middle
and
school.
fresh. Exactly. So it was a great age group to work with. I loved it. I was assigned a social worker to work with me. The social work aspect was more difficult because these were at-risk families to begin with, and there were issues.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about, how can I leverage my education degree, still stay in education. I wasn't necessarily excited about going straight into a classroom, into a formal classroom, a public school. And I realized, Simmons had a brochure that talked about school librarianship, and I thought, this sounds like a great way to meld my love of reading, teaching, etc. And I started looking into that, and as David mentioned in his interview, he was more dissatisfied with teaching. He has a music education degree.
Yeah, you mentioned.
Yeah, and he would rather have performed than taught. When he did his student teaching, he realized he really didn't want to teach. So we sent him to school to get his Master's of Library Science first. Then we saved up another bundle of money for a down payment on a home, the first home, typical young
That's
people.
That's usually a pretty substantial job to raise that money.
Right.
We all have gone through that era in our lives.
Yeah. And then the second pot of money we saved went towards my education at Simmons. So I graduated 8 years after David. But that turned out fine because in the interim, I decided I really want to make sure this is what I want to do. So I volunteered while I was teaching at the Concord Public Library in Concord, New Hampshire, in their children's room. And that led to a full-time position with as a paraprofessional circulation supervisor. So that was a nice first job for me to see how a whole library works. It has the children's department, reference department, circ, tech services, etc. And I got to learn a lot of things from the different supervisors. How to deal with problem employees, how to, it was good modeling, the things you don't always
very useful in your current position.
Anywhere, especially when you're younger, in your 20s, it's good to see people who've been, experienced people, how they handle a lot of issues.
Yeah, I
So-
guess you can't have that bullwhip in your office and straighten them out with that, and if that doesn't work.
Right, so, and when you're younger, you just haven't had those experiences. So it's kind of nice to be able to watch from afar and see how that all works. Also, while I was working as a circulation supervisor, I took some career testing and counseling, and they pointed out that you have good social skills, but you also have like off the Richter scale detail-oriented skills. They said usually people, it was funny, the counselor who talked to me said, usually when people are this detail-oriented, they even have a hard time interacting with a doorknob. And that stuck with me because that was just such an interesting way to put it. But she said, you have both the social skills and the detail-oriented skills. She had suggested being an accountant would be a great thing. But I got realizing right away, well, if I'm going to stay in libraries, where do you need detail-oriented skills? Of course, tech services. So that sort of cast the die for me. I watched around for tech services openings, and eventually I got hired at Franklin Pierce to be their serial supervisor. But of course, it's kind of interesting in life how the twists and turns are. I wanted to be a school librarian, and all these years
You end up in a
later,
law library.
yeah, with really big, instead of little kids, really big kids. So, life is full of irony.
So I like to ask often, and I think you've sort of maybe just already answered it, how it was you decided to come into our niche of the library profession, but it sounds like that was where the job was.
There you go. Yeah, life is
Or
amazing.
maybe you want to take credit for going through a more elaborate and determination process.
I think I'll take fate, sort of, or
Well, why
things
not?
work well.
I
Yeah.
think most of us, that's sort of how our careers develop, especially early on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what was it like? You were working in library while you were in library school, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
did that combination work for you?
Well, it worked really well. What was really nice about Franklin Pierce Law Center, which is now University of New Hampshire Law School, was that I got hired in as a serial supervisor. So I got a lot of good experience there. We went from a manual check-in system, complete with a Cardex, flat
Oh,
file.
the new crowd won't know what that is in the
That's
computer era.
That's right.
You had to check everything in with a pen and pencil, probably a pencil actually.
Yeah,
So
a
if you made
mechanical
mistake, you
pencil.
could,
Yeah.
remove it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this
on
is
a
some
single sheet of paper that were in these drawers full of them.
right. You pull out the drawer,
Yeah.
and it was a
Print
flip
stuff.
file of I guess they were metal little flip file
Yeah.
overlapping plates, and they would hold your little check-in card, maybe 4x5 or so, and you'd have to use a mechanical pencil. You're right, so that you'd always have a sharp pencil to check in the serial subscriptions. Everything from typical law journals to loose leafs to pocket parts, that sort of thing. We had over 2,000 serial subscriptions at the time because there were no ebooks. This was the early 90s.
And then when the bills came, somebody had to look to see if you had actually checked them in.
That's exactly
before paying
right.
the bill, since
Yes.
occasionally these things didn't arrive.
This is great. This is exactly
And the worst
right.
thing was
Yeah.
then having to look through these mechanical records for what didn't show up that should have about when it and then make claims.
Right, because sometimes the only way you knew you didn't get it is you flipped open the little card and you had gotten volume 2. I now had volume 4 in my
Yes.
hand. Oops, we
But
missed
where's
issue.
3?
Yeah, where's 3? And of course the fun thing about that is claiming 2 was very different at the time. As most of us today even have Hein as our jobber for those sort of things. We did back then too. And you would pick up the phone and you would call and say, hi, this is, Karen from Franklin Pierce. And usually in this era, the early 90s, the woman who answered on the other phone in Buffalo, New York, was named Loretta. Does this name ring a bell to
I
you?
don't recognize Loretta, but
Okay, yeah.
but I didn't work at this end of our operation,
Right,
so I
right.
wouldn't make the call.
Right.
People in acquisitions and serials. did that.
Right, and actually a lot of older, veteran tech services people remember Loretta's name.
Yeah.
She was so famous that in the early to mid 90s, during one of the AELL annual meetings, Hein advertised, "Come to our booth and meet Loretta." 'Cause
Oh,
so
why
many
not?
of us
Yeah.
had a telephone connection with her.
in an earlier era, and I thought you might mention this name, the
Uh-huh.
person, Eileen Hine.
Oh.
That was Bill's mother.
Oh, neat.
And she and her late father, Bill's father, before he died early on, this was their business, and she continued for many years afterwards. I worked with her and got to know who she was because for some years I was the business manager for the Law Library Journal, which meant that I worked with the advertisers, and she was the company contact
Neat. It's
for a
neat.
long time. She was a delightful lady.
Oh wow, it's so neat to work with a family
Yeah.
business like that. That's
And
really
of course, the family is in transition right now. Where this is 2018, the spring. They've just recently announced that the next generation is stepping up. The ones in my generation are, moving aside and letting their the next group take over the everyday management of business. So it's a nice transition to watch. And there'll be probably some changes in focus and so on, but that's reality.
Right, and it's kind of a neat transition to see with Hine versus the transitions we have seen in general, where the bigger company
Yeah.
gobbles up the smaller companies.
Well, as far as I know, there's nothing of that in the offing, and
That's right.
Having been through it with all the other companies, I would personally not like to see it, but it's
Right.
their company, not mine, so
There you
their
go.
call, not mine.
Right, but so far so good for that kind of that
Yeah.
family feel. While I was at Franklin Pierce as my original position, serial supervisor, I helped them start the transition from the Cardex files to an automated serial system. So that was that was a really good learning experience in itself. I migrated about a third of those 2,000 or so subscriptions.
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of work study students who helped me with loose leaf filing, which is probably a different concept for people
I
nowadays.
wonder if
too.
they have work study now. You're still active. Do you have them at the university?
We do. We use undergrads exclusively, just because they seem to have more time and not as many.
We used a lot of work study students for a while where I was. In fact, we were the heaviest user of them on campus for a long time until the other departments discovered that they didn't have to come up with all the money for their salaries.
Right.
Suddenly we couldn't get very many because we had a lot of competition.
Ah, there you go. That's right. Well, Franklin Pierce at the time was a standalone university,
Yes.
only a law school. So we actually hired the law students, but we pitched it as, hey, if you come work for me, you can file. If you're an environmental, law candidate, you can file the environmental CCHs if you want or whatever. The only ones I didn't have the work-study students work on were the B&A tax management portfolios.
Those were hard to do.
Yes.
And they would often probably, instead of filing them, put them in the file under the desk. And you wouldn't catch it until the traces arrived.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's right. So
And the
with
culprit was long gone.
That's right. So I used the little comb to put them in. So anyhow, those are memories. But I was there a couple years before David and I realized I was ready to go back to school. I started going to Simmons one class a semester and working full time. And David and I sat down and had an ROI discussion about return on investment. Maybe I should just go ahead and go full time if possible and work part time and get my professional career launched and make more money, etc. So Franklin Pierce was very kind to me. They allowed me to go part time, and they needed a full time serial supervisor. But what they did is they created a temporary part-time technical services assistant position for me. And they were very kind to me. They taught me copy cataloging, original cataloging. I got to do a lot of
must have become
special.
fairly valuable if they're going to all that trouble. They
They were-
wanted to hold on to you.
It was a really good win-win. I'm very thankful to Melanie Cornell, who was my head of tech services there and is still there working for them as their systems person, and Judy Geyer, who was their director. She allowed me to do that. It was just a really good melding of theory with practice. I did, my classroom and work experience really reinforced what I was, and complemented each other. So I was able to bring good practical experience into the classroom during discussions and assignments, and then bring theory and skills back. You know, as I took my cataloging classes, I could, you know, they let me do more of the cataloging and those sort of things. So it was a really good
That
experience.
probably sort of made it real what you were learning in library school too. I mean, you went back to the library and these skills were suddenly very useful.
Right, right. So it was. I think it was a win-win for both sides, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you finished library school, my notes indicate that you went to a small St. Paul's school, it was called, which is a prep school, I guess, in the area.
Is,
Prep school. Was that right after you got the library degree, or was it afterwards? Because you were at Franklin Pierce going to library school.
Right. It was me. My last semester at Simmons, I was interviewing, and I was offered this job at St. Paul's School. I knew that the Franklin Pierce job was temporary. They were very good to do part-time, but they knew they couldn't keep me forever.
Okay.
So I took this job. It was also in Concord, New Hampshire. It's one of those typical or stereotypical, maybe, old New England boarding schools.
Yeah, I have a note that John Kerry, our former Secretary of State, was one of their graduates.
That's exactly right. And another little tidbit is one of his classmates was named Robert Mueller.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, that's a small world.
In the news these days.
That's
special
right.
counsel dealing with election problems and that sort of thing.
That's
That
right.
may have occurred with, should we say, influence from another power
There you
outside the
go.
United States.
Yep. And another special prosecutor who was a graduate at St. Paul's is Archibald Cox.
He dealt with a version of some of this more internal than both internal and external.
Right.
A generation or so back.
Yes, I know. So
And got fired, as I recall.
That's true. Yeah, what was it, the Saturday Night Massacre or whatever?
Yeah.
Yep. So anyway,
Well, I
small
keep
world.
hearing there's rumors that the current one might have that happen, but it hasn't happened.
That's right. Knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So you were there for a while. It was a regular prep school library and all of that
It
sense?
was. It's a boarding prep school, kind of one of the elite ones in New England.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because academically it was like being at a small college.
Ah.
The library itself was its own standalone building, right next to their beautiful chapel. You know, the irony was the library building was fairly newly built. And it was made from sandstone from Colorado, which is kind of funny. Eventually I left there to go. So it was like being at a small college. The students had classes 6 days a week. They had Saturday morning classes. The library was open 7 days a week till 10 p.m. each night. And so it's kind of fun. Part of my duties were, I was the circulation supervisor once again, but part of my duties were collection development, so that made it fun to,
I imagine that their curriculum was modeled much more after that of the first couple of years of college than the more traditional public high school. That I understand a lot of those schools, that's part of what they offer.
Right, and they do offer, even individual studies. So they had
That must put more demands on the library.
It did, actually, which was kind of nice. That was kind of fun to see. Like, we had students way back, this was in the late 90s. They were looking into artificial intelligence, a lot of biology, biochem, those sort of things. So these were students going off, to Ivy League schools. And so you're right, it was very much a prep school in many senses of the word. One of my duties while I was there was I replaced a lady who had been there for about 32 or 33 years.
So they didn't tend to hire job hoppers.
Yeah, that's true too. That is true.
And they treated them decently.
Yeah, there you go. That's true. And she, of course, it was a manual checkout system. It was everything was manual. Even had the card catalog drawers. Part of when I was hired, it was made clear to me you're going to be automating the circulation system. In fact, they were moving to a new one. They went with Circe Unicorn. So eventually part of my charge was to barcode the whole collection, was to get reserves and circulation up and going. It was kind of a sad afternoon to see the card catalog finally go, because I knew there was another lady who'd been there for decades too, and that had been one of her duties to file in the
Well,
card
that
catalog.
was so labor intensive. I mean,
Yeah.
people would buy into it emotionally.
Yeah.
We did the same thing with some
Yeah.
of our people, but I remember the day my catalog librarian came to me and said, Pat, you can get rid of that now. We've gotten everything out of it that we need, and it's
Yeah.
all in the new automated system.
Yeah,
And I thought, well, times change.
yeah, you're right. So that, even in a traditional, New England boarding school, that's
Yeah.
true.
Could you imagine in our field trying to do things with manual records? I mean, you talked about Cardex, which was the check-in and processing of what had come and getting it paid for, and card catalog, which was probably the only one they had, although a few
Right.
places did have more than one, but not very many because they were so expensive to
Right.
maintain, including file the cards in correctly.
Right.
And then when they had for a while microfiche versions, so that say public
Oh.
library in a county where I used to live would have the microfiche library catalog of their
Yeah.
entire collection in each branch, and periodically they'd have new copies of the microfiche, so you keep it up to date. That was so tremendously innovative at the time. But now what
Right.
we do with the online systems is just a different world.
It really is. Yeah, younger people don't know. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You're right.
The scary thing is some of us that are really, well, that long
That's true.
back who can remember these changes are fairly recent.
Right, right. I don't feel that old, but yeah. That's
Exactly.
right.
I was going to say that about myself, but I guess I'm a little older.
Oh, or
than
no,
myself.
either of us. You're right.
You know, that was interesting. So you were at St. Paul's for, what, a couple of years, 2.5?
Yeah, 2.5, 3. Yeah, that's right.
I'm
Yeah.
sort of glancing at notes here.
Yeah.
And then you moved out, and I had questions on the script, the original script,
Yeah.
about how you decided to move to Colorado, but your husband basically has told me all that in his session
So,
about the two of you. So you moved in 1998
Yes.
to Colorado and accepted appointment as metadata services librarian at the University of Colorado Law Library, which may or may not have had that title at that time, but did it or?
right. Oh, as far as like the William A. Wise, or as far as my
No, the
title of
metadata
yeah.
librarian.
You're right, that is a good point. I was actually hired as the catalog.
That's what I
librarian.
would guess,
Yeah.
because sort of that's evolved into metadata with
Right.
all metadata.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, everything, things keep marching
Yeah.
along, all
I know
those
the
progress. Yeah.
Position at my old library, my successor has renamed the person who was the catalog librarian is now the metadata librarian there.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, sort of before we talk about Colorado, do you have anybody that you would consider a particular mentor, or maybe more than one in our field?
Well, it's there are a lot of people I'm very, very grateful for, of course. All of the colleagues back at Franklin Pierce. Melanie Cornell is still there. All these years
Okay.
later, she was the one who helped me learn my copy cataloging and original cataloging. Judy Geyer, the director there, who hired me and who kept me on part-time when she didn't need to, but she was really good, kind to do that. Of course, I've had a lot of people in Colorado who've been helpful to me. Barbara Bentlev, who is also,
heavens, yes.
yep, she was the director at the library at CU when I was hired there, so she hired me. And of course, a former AELL president too, so
That's right.
well known, yep. There are 2 people left at the law library currently at CU who have been there longer than me. I've been there almost 20 years now. One of them is our faculty services librarian, Jane Thompson, who is she has overall excellence, just a model of excellence, professionalism, graciousness, competency, especially as a researcher. So I've learned a lot from her over the years too. And of course, my current director is Susan Nevelo-Mart.
Yeah.
And she has just a lot of enthusiasm for life and for the library, a lot of vision. She's very supportive, and she's just not afraid to innovate. She has a lot of willingness to try new things. So, but anyone...
She's somebody I'm going to talk to early part of next week.
That's right, yeah.
In fact, that's how we ended up meeting up with you and David here, because I was assuming you'd all be at work and I could come by and talk with you.
And look what happened.
Found out, well, you're going to be off
The galloping
on a little,
catalog.
holiday. And, well, where's that? Well, we're going to be coming through there, and it worked out.
Life is amazing
And
how it
Susan
works
is
out.
we're going to get her story. Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad because hers is well worth having. But of course, anyone who's been in the tech services law librarian field at any point in the last 20 years will tell you the person who's had the most influence on me is Georgia Briscoe,
Yeah.
by far.
She is somebody that we're dying to interview. She's not going to be there because she's off climbing mountains in the
Yes.
Himalayas. I think.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
I mean, talk about you must all be on leave. Who's running the shop?
That's right. I know.
Yeah.
I have to admit.
We're hoping to be able to schedule a session with her at some point.
That would be great.
But it isn't every day I come driving along, so
Right,
if I have to do it, I don't know, that'll be tricky. But maybe she and I or one of the others who are involved in this
Right.
be able to talk to her.
And she has ties to Washington, so who knows? Washington
Well,
State.
she might come
Yeah.
out where I live, and if she
Right.
hasn't been interviewed yet, we'll set it up maybe out there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, she's, Georgia's just, anyone who's worked with her over these years, she's been in law libraries for many decades. And she's just been such a good teacher, advisor, role model, support system for me. Actually, every step of my professional law library career, she's been there with me because she was the one who hired me, she and Barbara. She just has a lot of technical knowledge and wisdom, but she also has a big picture vision of tech services' role in providing really excellent service to patrons. And that's not, there are tech services departments who are pretty myopic, and follow the rules to the letter.
Well, part of it is the stereotypical image of librarians in general is we're not that adventuresome to have rapid change around us.
Right. And
Although, boy, has there been a lot.
That's true. There you go. We've been talking about a lot of change,
Yeah.
actually. And of course, I often find myself asking this question when I'm faced with some sort of decision, even with cataloging or whatever. What would Georgia do?
Well, I've asked that about some of my mentors over
Yeah,
the years.
yeah.
What would so and so do? And
Yeah.
that's what I did. Or if I wasn't sure what so and so would do, that's when we had telephones.
That's right. An email now. You're right.
Email now, yeah.
Right.
In those days, we didn't have
Yeah.
that yet. And
Yeah.
telephoning long distance was expensive in those days.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But we'd still do it.
Yep, that's right. Even when I came to see you 20 years ago, you had to watch,
Yeah.
watch that. But she's just been an excellent role model of both service and scholarship for me. She sets a really high bar for excellence and professionalism. Like we said, she's a hard worker who literally climbs every mountain, on her way now to trek to Everest Base Camp.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the mountain to climb. I mean,
Right, exactly. She is amazing. She's just full of good advice.
Uh-huh.
She's been just so supportive of my service,
you
scholarship,
talked
and
about
career.
your running and stuff, but I didn't hear you mention climbing any mountains on that order.
That's right. Yeah,
So
I am
maybe
definitely not.
in that sense, she's not the mentor.
That's right. That's right. She is in another league on that. But I know my career would not have been as full or as successful without her influence and support. So by far, she is my biggest mentor. Even though there are many people I'm grateful to.
Now, I noticed in preparing for today, looking at your curriculum vitae, that in about 2003, you did some work with your husband's library, on subject headings and so on.
That's
Do
true.
you have anything you'd like to mention that or comment on that?
Sure. I was more of an advisor in that capacity.
That's the best type of thing.
That's
Because
right.
then you're not responsible for the decision.
There you go. That's right. That is perfect. As we know, David's Law Library is the National Indian Law Library.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to use Library of Congress subject headings, Indians of North America just doesn't do it. Because that's everything in his library. So he realized certainly after he got there, they had an online catalog, but it was internal only. It was not external to the public. He wanted to make that public. That was one project. But he also realized he needed to have subject headings that were both granular and more standardized,
Mhm.
because the library had been operating for about 20 years before he got there. So, and under different people. So it
Mhm.
wasn't really standardized, and it obviously the granularity wasn't there in Library of Congress subject headings. So his assistant librarian, who was tasked with working on the catalog project, she and I worked together. I advised her on Library of Congress subject cataloging policies, practices, and procedures, you know, how to use subdivisions and, you know, those sort of things. As she came up with her proposed lists to use internally, not to propose to Library of Congress, but I reviewed her proposals to double check, you know, similarities or differences to Library of Congress, because they kind of preferred to use Library of Congress if they could,
Mhm.
but they knew that they couldn't always do that.
Yeah.
So
Well, if it just isn't
There.
complete or exists,
Right.
you do what you have to do.
right, so she just did. David had good vision to do this,
Mhm.
and she just did a really good job with it. In fact, she eventually wrote a Law Library Journal article about her project, and I've often referred people to it if they are in a small library that needs to make a specialized thesaurus. Even as recently as about 4 months ago, I recommended her article because, you know, just knowing the process. How do I even start? I'm sure that's really overwhelming to people. So.
Well, that sounds like you've had sort of fascinating experience on the side now and then.
Yeah, there you go. David and I collaborate on many things. You know, it's kind of nice being a.
Great. It's not often I've had the opportunity to speak to colleagues who happen to be spouses.
Yeah.
And both working in our field, but in very different kinds of libraries.
Yeah.
And you and David are probably unique in that sense, in my experience on these oral histories.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, that's true. It's kind of a mixed marriage in a way, the tech services and the reference services, but it works really well.
Well, if it works real well, let's not criticize what works real well.
Yeah, both professionally and personally. So yeah.
Well, maybe on that we should turn to your record of service to the profession, of which we mentioned early on, that you are going to be joining the executive board. You've maybe already been to your first meeting. I know they have one somewhere around this time of the year.
Oh, that's right. Well, I've kind of been introduced slowly. I didn't attend it, but I'm
Okay.
on the list for the board members, and I see the board book, and so it's,
Well, you're
it's
not
coming soon.
missing out on that much. Have you
the
had to
voice
see
of
that?
experience. Yeah,
That's a lot of reading.
yeah, 130 pages. You're right.
Yeah.
So July.
You may have to check an extra bag on the plane.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. So it's good they break you in slowly.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, you'll be taking office technically. This annual meeting is in Baltimore this year.
Yes.
So it'll be the one at the end of the annual meeting. At least that was there was one at the beginning and one at the end. Do they still operate that way? Or is it?
This time they're doing, there is one at the beginning, and I'll be an observer.
Okay,
So that's
that
like,
was the norm
yep,
then.
Thursday and Friday. And then they have a shorter meeting, more probably just for us to know each other,
Yeah.
on Tuesday afternoon, late after the programs. So.
I remember that shorter meeting when I was first going on the board. I think it was when I was president-elect. And we got the lowdown on the financial problems the association had run across. The executive director was relatively new, and he'd hired a cost accountant who was very good, who found out that some of the things that one sort of took as givens were not quite given, and we had to adjust her to reality, and that was scary next year or two, but we did it. And that's what the board's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Hopefully you won't run into anything of that. But that first meeting, that short one, was when the news was broken.
Oh man, yeah, that would be a hard one. Yeah, like what did
Yeah.
I get myself into? Yeah.
One of the staff members used to refer to that as that meeting from hell.
Oh no. There you go. It was infamous. Yeah.
Yeah, it was at that time.
Yeah.
But you've been active in quite a bit of things. Grants Committee for the Western Pacific Chapter of ALL, annual meetings, that chapter as well, that were in the Boulder area, or Boulder itself. you've done chair of committees for ALL, the Colorado Association of Law Libraries. I'm just sort of running through my
Yeah.
notes here. And even chair of ALL's Online Bibliographic Services Special Interest Section.
Right.
You want to talk about any of that type work and perhaps even why you've done it? And maybe if I've left anything really good out, you could add it in.
No, no, you really did a lot of good homework here. I have to admit that my job evaluation, my annual and my reappointment every 4 years, works on an 80-10-10 model.
Okay.
80% librarianship, 10% scholarship, 10% service.
All right.
Obviously, I'm way over the top of the 10% service. But mainly, the reason I do so much of that is I had such excellent role models with Barbara Bentlev,
Yeah.
being the president of AALL, Georgia Briscoe, who I followed in her footsteps as the chair of OBS, SIS. And of course, Susan Neville Lamarck currently just does a lot of service to the profession. They both value it and they support it in others. I found out, I think I've done so much of it because it's just been fun to meet a lot of colleagues. It was a great way to use and expand my kind of project management and social skills. I think I had a good meld of those. You know, it's been an honor actually to be chosen now to serve in the past positions and on the board right now. I've been.
Well, as I said early on, from my experience and that of many others, you're going to have a fabulous time on the board. It won't all be simple and easy, but
Right.
it will be interesting.
Yeah.
And you'll get to know people.
Yeah.
Not just the fellow board members, but be out to the community.
Yeah, that's it. It's
Yeah,
on a
well,
bigger, larger stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It'll be fun. So, I interrupted you.
Oh no, that's fine. I was going to say I'm really fortunate to have an excellent copy cataloger. She's really my cataloging assistant. I shouldn't even just call her just a copy cataloger.
Yeah.
I've had her about 15 years now, and she just so graciously, patiently, and competently supports me while I'm spending a lot of time on this service. You know, I'm lucky to have her, and I'm lucky to have the people I work with who also value it and let me spend time to do it. So, yeah.
Well, that's important. Yeah. Well, I noticed you and Georgia Briscoe and Cheryl Ray Nyberg wrote a item for the Law Library Journal, which won the journal's Article of the Year award back in 2004. And it was sort of the catalog versus the homepage. Well, looking ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
Best practices in connecting to online resources. Now that was still fairly early on. I mean, as these things go, has what you predicted and talked about then, is that still valid? Did it play out, or did it change more than you thought?
I should have probably revisited that more recently. Well, actually, one of the things that I liked about that particular article is it was a good collaboration with tech services people, Georgia and I, and Cheryl Ray Nyberg, of course, has done a lot of research reference work at University of Washington. I think in general that's how my scholarship is we try to meld how can tech services help public services, because everyone's goal is to give access to these resources to the general public or our patrons. I do have to admit, I think there's still a little bit of maybe the dichotomy there now isn't so much the catalog versus the homepage, even though in my own library we bring in the Cassidy bib records for the Hein Online electronic resources, for example. We also keep a database page on the front, and I think a lot of people use LibGuides to help people get to play. You know, it's gone even just beyond the homepage to other ways of accessing things. Discovery layers are now a new wrinkle there of how to find things, how to filter down. You know, use those keywords and then filter down to what types of things you have. I think everybody now does more of does some combination rather than either or. And I think in our article we did kind of point out that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. You know, do what works best for your patrons, for your public service staff. So yeah, this is good. I should revisit some of these. That's a good
You probably
question.
have your day job, your night job, and your other day job in the way, so you can't revisit everything.
There you
And
go.
maybe when you read for enjoyment, it's not necessarily the Law Library Journal.
Yeah, there you go. That's
Although
true.
maybe I'll have to edit that out. We'll be both in trouble.
No, I definitely, and I get my paper Law Library Journal. I know I should be more sustainable, but I just tend to.
Well, I
like
have been adventuresome enough to read it online.
Good for you.
Yeah, unless I in some way make a contribution to an issue, like help with a memorial or something. It's about all I contribute these days. Then I get a paper one sent to me free.
Oh, right. That's right. So that's a good. But I think I think that article started the conversation on how best to give access, and I think it's a continuing conversation with all these new things that have come in the last 14 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've been retired 15 years, and I don't know if I'd be competent to step back into the real world.
I know. It's amazing,
It's
isn't
such
it?
a change.
Yeah.
We used to joke when I was active, we'd look at our predecessors, the generation that basically got started around World War II and then tended to graduate into retirement about the time I was getting started. And they came into the field and left the field. There wasn't that much difference in law libraries. I mean, they were cataloging more stuff because they were buying more books and individual titles. Than in the old days when they just threw the reporters and the statutes on the shelf and everyone sort of knew you had them. It was a matter of where they were, and there wasn't that big a place, so you could find them.
And you could just browse the shelves
But
rather than,
we were beginning to see, microfilms came in. We were branching into international documents of various sorts, a lot more access to government documents, the U.S. government.
Right.
And then the computers came in with Lexis first in the early 70s, started to show up, and
Right, yeah.
then Westlaw followed around 1980, and we thought, boy, these people went through their entire careers, and look at us with all these changes.
Yeah.
Well, today you must look at us like you went through your entire careers, and now all these changes are coming.
I think all of us have, right, that's right, because when I started at the CU Law Library in 1998, I was cataloging books.
Yeah.
I wasn't, and then slowly we started, people were cataloging websites, internet resources. There weren't even really ebooks back then.
Yeah.
So that's some of my scholarship, in Law Library Journal was also like linking globally, coping locally, how to access online resources in your catalog. Those were things that, they had some technical details about MARC, et cetera, in them, but I think also I tried to bring in some theory and some project management and practical details, so that even when the technical details became sort of dated, you could still go back and look at those and think about the thought process behind all of that.
Well, you do a lot of that. You're fortunate to not only do it, be able to do it, but you're encouraged through the 10% or whatever it is of your evaluation every 4 years, and you have leaders of, at the head of the library who encourage you too.
Yeah, I'm very lucky on that,
Yeah.
for sure.
Because that was always a concern some of our colleagues would express over the years, that, I just don't have time, and the place won't, doesn't want to reward me for this sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah. One of the roles that librarians and senior people often play as part of the governance of the institution. Do you ever get involved in anything like that?
As far as, well,
Certainly in the law library.
right, yeah, we have a lot of different smaller committees, when we started making digital repositories, for example, which is a whole nother thing that, comes up too. How do you get people from the catalog to your digital repositories, and we've worked through that. But Susan has been really good about trying to get us serving the greater law school, to make us more integral, because it could be pretty easy for the librarians to be over here in the library. Even
That
though we're
was
in
one
law.
of the old problems. Often that was the case.
And Susan recognized that, so she pushed to have librarians included on all the different various law school committees.
That's important.
Yeah, so I have really, so we have people on the technology committee, which is great.
Yeah, well, you certainly ought to be. I mean, look at where a lot of the technology is.
Right.
And the expertise too, frankly.
Right. So I've had you could say good fortune or not so good fortune to be on the admissions committee. That's a lot of work, but it's been
reading those files, the ones you still have to read from scratch, that's a lot of reading,
It's
a lot of work, and a lot of trouble figuring out, well, am I making the right recommendation or not?
right, because there's so many that are, some are, there are lots that are clear, but of course the majority are in the middle. And CU has been lucky that we did not see the big drop off in applications that came several years back.
Yeah.
And in fact, the last few years, we've been just setting records every year, which is nice. I mean, that's a good problem to have.
Well, it's
if
a
allowed, yeah.
well-respected law school, state-supported. Maybe
Right.
that's a good combination in today's environment, where people are really worried about, I think they are, about debt, student debt.
Right. So you can, right, because it depends where you go. You can have 200,000 or you can have 100,000.
I mean, you look at the tuition and costs of going to school. I mean, the tuition was, when my daughter went through law school, it was costing us about double the tuition. The tuition was in the $20,000 range.
Yeah.
And we had to, she had to have a place to live and all the expenses.
Right.
But now tuitions are like $50,000 in some
It's
of those places,
amazing.
and that's,
Yeah,
that's got to be a tough one,
right.
for a lot of people.
So a state school is a good bargain generally. Yeah.
Yeah, Colorado, well respected,
And it's a beautiful place, right
and
at the
it's a
base.
nice place to live too.
Yeah.
I have visited there.
Oh,
a few times.
good. Yeah. It's right at the base of the foothills. So,
Yeah, you come across Nebraska and then, or wherever, Kansas, if you came
Right.
down a little farther south, and then suddenly you start to see a little more greenery and the mountains in the distance for a ways. It's
Yeah.
nice, and you're right up there as they begin.
Right. Yeah. So it's not a hard sell as far as coming to that beautiful place.
Well, maybe sort of on this diversion, which I'm guilty of
It's
often,
okay.
I should mention that we're probably coming to the end of our conversation this morning, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's customary for me to ask if there's anything that we've not talked about that you would like to bring up.
Well, let me think. I'm just trying to think.
And
if
it's
we've
not a
got-
test, because a lot of people don't have an
That's
age.
right. So, well, I guess from David's interview, we learned that it was his job that brought us west
Yeah.
in 1998.
You were a dutiful spouse in a little more traditional sense, but
Yeah.
that's another reality. I mean, so often both spouses are earning and they're in responsible jobs. It's not like, my parents' generation and maybe even yours.
Yeah, that's true. It was really kind of a neat, it was a leap of faith. We really
Yeah.
wanted to be out west, as David mentioned. We had been traveling in the west on vacations, wanted to come out. I had the good luck that, we sort of joked about, oh yes, I'm sure they'll just hire me at CU as soon as they hear I'm in town. And knowing that wouldn't happen. I even took conversational.
Unfortunately, it did.
It did. I know. That's the
for them
funny
and
thing.
you.
Yeah, that's the funny thing in it. I even took conversational Spanish classes when we got to Colorado, in anticipation that I would probably be working in a public library.
Well, you could regress to 4-year-olds or something.
There you go.
Probably
I know.
plenty of need for the people
I know.
in that
I've
field.
been in a boarding high school, and then
Yeah.
I just keep going up the rank with kids. But when David first got his job, the head of public services at CU at the time, Mitch Fontenot, invited David over to say, take a tour, I'll introduce you to the other professional librarians here, to see your colleagues. When David was introduced to Georgia, there was a book truck full of Colorado CLEs right outside our office. And David just casually mentioned, my wife used to work at Franklin Pierce. She used to catalog the New Hampshire CLEs. And Georgia,
boy.
yeah, and then you can have to see where this is going. Georgia casually said, you should have her send her resume. And we thought, when David came home and told me that night, we just thought, she was being a really nice colleague. She would shop my resume around, Unbeknownst to us, she called me just the day she got my resume. It was the world's shortest cover letter. Thank you for spending time with my husband David today, and thank you for asking for my resume. Please feel free to share it with whomever. Well, it turned out a few days before David had come for his tour, their cataloger had given her notice. So when she heard there was a cataloger who had moved to town, this was kind of the whole irony. But it also
probably figured, well, now how could this stroke of luck hit me? But I'm delighted.
Yes. So I eventually did get the job, and it really made
I thought
David.
maybe you can tell me she didn't shop at the library. She shopped your resume along to the director and the dean and the
That's
budget people at the
exactly.
university to get a position.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, what it did happen is I got their empty position. It did make David and I realize it was like meant to be. That life is amazing.
Well, you just sort of settled in for about 20 years,
Yeah.
and are still going.
That's right. And it's just been wonderful. Life is amazing. How it takes twists and turns. Like I said, I wanted to be a school librarian, and here I am with big kids.
Well, you are
Yeah.
sort of a school librarian, but
That's
the kids
right.
are bigger.
That's right. So
25 years old.
that's right. So
Civilized.
that's right. There you go. But it does make me feel like there is a bigger plan for your life, and things work out. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
And why not?
Yeah. So
Well, when you're enjoying what you do and they're treating you decently, we couldn't have it better.
yeah. So I agree. Yeah.
Well, maybe on that, I should thank you, Karen, for taking time this morning to not only let me come here, but to talk with me on camera for the oral history. And in thanking you, I'm thanking you on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Odek, and Dick Spinelli, who are colleagues with whom I've had the honor of working to put together this oral history for the Ein Online database.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for inviting me and including me.